There's a lot of illegal activity around the whole world, but a lot more, in fact, in parts of Africa. I think a lot similar to the sort of activity you find in Central and South America. It's just we haven't discovered it yet because we're not quite as vigilant as they are. So there's a lot of illegal activity, mainly in the criminal world. Narcotics trafficking, people trafficking, ordinary smuggled goods, untaxed goods, etc. Now that obviously has an impact on the economy. It has an impact on people as individual humans. And in the long run, of course, the same sort of routes and channels that are used to smuggle untaxed goods, for argument's sake, or narcotics, can be used to smuggle weapons and explosives for terrorist groups. And for that matter, money for terrorist groups, which can move electronically but also physically. So there's your long-term threat.
Gee, that's very serious. Weapons, money for terrorist groups. And at this time, do we have any evidence that may already have happened?
No, I don't know if there's a belief that some terrorist groups use South Africa as a transit area and staging area, but nothing, no concrete proof. It's really just based on the fact that it would be a good idea from their point of view. But I think there's ample evidence of the movement of narcotics, of the untaxed goods, and of illegal immigrants. There's ample evidence of that. And those are in themselves long-term security problems, and certainly in the immediate term, they are human security problems and they're economic problems.
But who should be taking responsibility for protecting our borders, do you think, Helmut?
Well, strictly speaking, it is neither really a military nor police task. I think a lot of countries around the world you find have a gendarmerie or a border guard or some such specialized agency. But a country that's a little bit cash-strapped as we are at the moment, having an extra force like that is maybe not a good idea. So it comes down to either police or army. The police demonstrably have not been able to handle it. So it's now fallen back to the defense force with the main weight falling onto the army because they have to provide the bodies on the ground. That's for the actual border line. That is, the Navy, of course, would be responsible for the exclusive economic zone, for our maritime borders. The Air Force, together with the Army, for looking at people moving stuff across the border illegally by air, which has also already happened. So it's the full defense force, really. And, of course, border posts as such, that is SARS, police, and Home Affairs. That's their responsibility there. The guys are either crossing legally or semi-legally or trying to pretend they're legal. The challenge, of course, for the Defense Force is it's been underfunded for 2 decades now and is under strength for what it's already doing in terms of peacekeeping work in Africa. Now adding the border protection task and in due course adding, I believe, also the protection of national key points is going to greatly overstress the organization unless it gets the necessary funding to recruit more personnel and to buy the specialized equipment, which is not particularly expensive but does need to be bought for these roles.
But also complicating matters further may very well be that, Helmut, there are decisions, or there were decisions taken that perhaps deploy SAPS across the borders, and now those decisions are being reversed. There's an issue of decisions around that, political decisions even.
Look, yeah, the decision at the time, it was taken for a whole range of reasons. It was primarily the thinking was that one should demilitarize a lot of things, and particularly borders. And the idea of having troops patrolling a border with a friendly country sort of stirs a bit of a bad taste in the mouth at the best of times anyway. So the idea was to demilitarize, move it to the police. The police just clearly didn't do the job very well for a whole range of no doubt good reasons. So back now to the military, we've changed our mind. The pity of it is, of course, that this on-again, off-again is a very inefficient way of doing things. And if I may add, there's one other factor to consider. The more we integrate with the Southern African development community, the more the reality is that some of our border activity, control activity, actually should be shifting north to the northern borders of the SADC, not just South Africa's border. And in any event, we need to also work closely with our immediate neighbors so they don't just shuffle problem people across the border to us, but actually grab them themselves.
Interesting. All right, then please just stand by for me, if you may, Helmut, because I would like to bring in Adrian Lakay then. Of course, the very nature of illicit trade is that you will never have the information, all the information that you need, because it's all underground. But what do we know about what may be happening across our borders and as far as illicit trading is concerned, Adrian?
I think the reality is, Tkolani, if you have an economy like ours, if you have a country with a geographic location like ours, which is central to most trade routes, both located between the west and the east, and you have 1.5 trillion rands worth of goods moving through your borders, you have to be mindful and you have to expect that your country will be exposed to illicit activity. In our context, I think we've seen it very pervasive. In a particular context, again, which is ours, that I think the whole nature of border operations, border policing and control changed after 1994. We are now a constitutional democracy and there's a particular emphasis on human rights. And I think state agencies have to realign their policies, their procedures and also their systems and how they work together to be able to keep track and stay relevant to these new developments. So what Parliament has done was to invite us to give an honest, full and frank assessment of the situation in SA the situation at SA borders, both land, sea and air space. As Helmut indicated, there are long-term concerns, and those concerns are how accurate are our police, or is our policing, our systems, how accurate are they to detect, to deter and to combat illicit activity, and there are serious concerns that we did put to Parliament. I think it was also an acknowledgement on the side of government and the agencies and the department that made the presentations that there's been policy changes and acknowledgement that maybe some of our strategies didn't work very effectively. In 2009, President Zuma gave the directive for a new border management agency that must be established. Work is in progress to do that, and the whole objective is to better align what the police would be doing, what the Defence Force is doing, what SARS is doing, what Home Affairs role is, to align our systems to see where the resource constraints are and to make sure that we can avail resources to better police our border line, number one, control the management of or the movement of goods and people, number two, and to make sure, number three, that we have systems that can be coordinated, or we can share the work we do in a way that's more effective.
All right. No, I hear that. But I want to go back again to my original question, Adrian, because I want to know from you whether SARS in particular and or broadly government has any idea of the kind of illicit trading that is happening. If you do, what kind of trade is it? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about fake cigarettes? Are we talking about bootlegging? What are we talking about?
I think if we can categorize them, as you've alluded to, tobacco, cigarette smuggling is one of the biggest concerns. It includes also a smaller component of illicit alcohol trade. Then, of course, the narcotics that we see, particularly at airports and also harbors that come into the country. Number three would be our natural resources, abalone in particular, rhino horn, as we've seen the past 2 weeks, being in the headlines. And the last category and the first one, tobacco smuggling, alcohol smuggling, and our natural resources, abalone and rhino horn, those we see criminal syndicates, organized crime syndicates being involved. And those crimes are transnational. They take resources from this country into other countries. It involves things potentially like money laundering, illicit traffic, or illicit trafficking of people. So it's all part of what we could call the criminal economy, as Helmut alluded to. And those are very complex. So what we've seen in the last week, 2 suspects arrested at OR Tambo on Friday. We believe them to be linked to a rhino poaching syndicate. On Tuesday this week, a South African farmer handed himself over to the authorities. He's to be charged as well and linked to the criminal operations. We're looking at money laundering, human trafficking, and of course the illicit export of rhino and other animal products. So you have a ring of organized crime and a syndicate operating both here and in countries in East Asia. So you have to work with the authorities there. You need proper intelligence. You need to understand how the thing works and who are involved ultimately. And concerningly, always in these kinds of crimes, when you do detect them, is the link to South African businessmen or South African farmers or South African nationals who, motivated, suspected by greed, then get involved in these things and obviously try and exploit whatever weaknesses there are in the system.
All right. Let me bring in Spiwe Dlamini before I get analysis again from Helmut, because, Mr. Dlamini, I would like to know from the SANDF's point of view, what is your responsibility in ensuring the security around our border line, and are you carrying that out as best you can as far as you understand?
Yes, thank you very much. I think ours is in line with what both Helmut and my colleague McKay have said. We are responsible as mandated by the Defence Act that we are employed as a defence force to serve the Republic inside or on international waters and borders to control the national border line. and we are working closely with the other sister departments. We are already deployed, as my two colleagues have already mentioned, and we're deploying in phases at the moment. But I would also like to stress this a little bit further. We've just recently had 2 meetings with our sister countries, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. In fact, we finished what we called a Joint Permanent Commission on Defense and Security with Mozambique on Tuesday here in Pretoria, where we looked at these issues that McKay was speaking about. And together with Zimbabwe, we also looked at the similar matters that we were looking at with Mozambique. And we also have joint permanent commissions with Botswana and Zambia to look at these illegal activities throughout the borders of the SADC region as a whole. As Helmut has pointed out, there's no use of us sitting back in South Africa, looking at what comes into South Africa, instead of taking a total package and say, what is it that is coming into the region? And that approach of joint permanent commissions on defense and security with other SADC countries is looking precisely at that.
All right, let me get the last comment. Spio, I'm going to come back to you because Helmut has got to go. But I need this last comment in relation to the management agency that government is proposing, the Border Management Agency, because as far as I understand, it was tested during the World Cup and it pretty much was successful. What do you think about it now taking over permanently in as far as securing our borders, Helmut?
Look, I think that's the answer. And I'm quoting a U.S. admiral in context who's actually speaking about maritime security. Border security is what you would have called a team sport. No one agency can do it by itself. The military have got the wherewithal to protect borders and the coastline, but they need intelligence to do it properly and intelligently. They do not have the skills to man border posts, which Home Affairs and SARS do. SARS will also be gathering intelligence for them, so it's very much a team sport. And that team has got to be managed by somebody. And having a border management agency is probably the most cost-effective and intelligent way to do this thing. We've just got to make sure it works, make sure that the different agencies and services involved actually do share information and cooperate properly. So you need a strong person at the helm of this thing, and you need to make everybody understand that they do need to cooperate. And then, of course, everybody who's involved does need adequate funding to do the job properly.